This video was sponsored by Floral Shirts because apparently that's all I wear in videos now. Hello my lovely friends, it's Margaret and I am the Word Nerd. I know it's the end of April, but I figured I needed to get my March wrap-up up at some point in time in my life, eventually. So now is when we're sitting down to film it, because now is when we have time to film it, and also a lot of these books have to go back to the library today, or I'm getting late fees, and I don't want late fees, so we're just gonna go into it. Yeah. I read 14 books this month, last month, whatever month it is. You get it. Whatever month is in the title, I read 14 books. All of that comes to 5,132 pages, yep, and that's 367 pages per book, although a lot of them were shorter than that. I had 4 5-star books, 5 4-star books, and 5 3-star books in my month this month, which is fantastic. I had a really good reading month. Like, there were no books, there was one that frustrated me, but there were no books that I absolutely hated. The genre breakdown, to no one's surprise, I'm actually kind of disappointed that this is the genre breakdown because I'm trying to diversify my genres, okay? But the genre breakdown was 10 fantasy books, 1 dystopian, 1 contemporary, 1 nonfic, and 1 mystery. Yeah. And of those, I read 1 graphic novel, 7 audiobooks, and 6 hard copy books. So that's actually a pretty even balance because that's half and half. Half of them were hard copy and half of them were audiobooks. Now that the stats are out of the way, it's time to tell you about the books I read this month. I'm gonna try and do this a little bit of a different way than I've been doing it, which is to just start at the beginning and go to the end, because I keep getting mixed up at what format each book is. So I'm going to try and do these by format, starting out with graphic novels. I read Ouran High School Host Club Volume 4. I had to return it to the library, so you get this lovely overlay of the cover with Haruhi and someone. I'm not entirely sure which character it was. I don't remember. I love this series so much. I just do. It's such a good series. It makes me so happy. There were a few moments in here where I was just like, yeah, this is so 2002. We could have worded that better. We could have, that joke is a little out of taste. But overall, I still enjoyed it. I still love it. And I still gave it 5 freaking stars because it's just such a good series. And I love Haruhi so much. Unfortunately, that was the only graphic novel I read this month, but let's move on to the audiobooks. The first audiobook that I listened to was Ever the Brave by Erin Summerall. I am trying to get to Once a King. I have a feeling Once a King is going to be my favorite in the series just from the setup, because the setup for that book is in this book. Just the dynamic. You get a little bit of the dynamic that is in the romance in the third book, and I'm just like, perfection. The first book is about Britta, and basically she has this type of magic that's kind of forbidden. They're very superstitious, and they see these magical people, channelers, as very bad and harmful, and they're not. They're just people who can, like, use the elements. Long story short, she's having to track down her childhood best friend, who is also her father's apprentice apprentice assassin to the king, but she has also been taught everything that her father taught this other kid, and so she's tracking this kid down, trying to figure out why would he have murdered my father. And that just gets her drawn into all of this political intrigue. And that kind of gets wrapped up in the last book. But then there's more that happens because there's a war coming in the last book. And so Britta has to try and, like, stop this war from happening. I liked this one better. I felt like the romance was better. I felt like the story had more impact for me. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I liked the series. I think that the books keep getting better and better as you go. This book is definitely better than the first book, and I have a feeling the third book is going to be better than this one. I did feel like this one stuck with me, and I was able to pay more attention to it. So I just think that when I was reading Ever the Hunted, I just was not in the right place to be paying attention to this particular story. The next audio book that I read, and, like, y'all, why was I sleeping on this series? I really am disappointed in myself because this series is amazing. I love it. I've read the first, I'm on book 2 at this point because I read book 2 in April. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to talk about Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. This is about Charlotte Holmes and Jamie Watson. It's told from Jamie's point of view. Jamie ends up shuttled off to a boarding school in Connecticut, I think it is, where Charlotte Holmes, the descendant of Sherlock Holmes, also happens to be, and Jamie is the descendant of James Watson. And so since he was a kid, he's had, like, all of these fantasies about them meeting and teaming up and becoming, like, this great crime-solving duo, like his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and her great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather were. However many greats there are. He doesn't leave a great first impression. It's just, like, it's kind of a mess. He's 100% done with the world, which I absolutely adore. I just love Jamie. I love him so much. I also love Charlotte. She has her issues, but I do love her. They both have issues, honestly. So many issues. Both of them. They end up being the prime suspects when one of their fellow students gets murdered. So despite the kind of rocky start that they had, they end up having to team up so that they don't get accused of murder. They have to go solve the crime, and it's a disaster in the best kind of way. There's intrigue, there's revenge. It's great. I enjoyed it. I cannot wait to go on to book 3. Like, this is such a good series. I gave this 4 stars. The next book I finished was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and that is The Everlasting Rose by Danielle Clayton. This is about Camellia, and in the first book, we're introduced to the world of the Bells. And in Camellia's world, people are born gray and ugly. They just not pretty at all. Like, their hair is made of straw, they have red eyes, their skin is gray, and they are obsessed with becoming beautiful. And the only way that they can do that is to procure the services of a bell. And bells are able to bring color to people's skin and their eyes and their hair and make them so that they look like what we would consider normal people. Camellia and her sisters are being presented before the royal court of Orleans to see who is going to be the queen's favorite. And Camellia really wants to be the queen's favorite. Like, really does. But as she finds out later, there is a lot that comes with being the queen's favorite that she did not sign up for. A lot of political intrigue. There's stuff about her powers that she has not been told, stuff that's been kept secret from the girl. Book 2 is basically following straight after book 1, and Camellia is looking for answers for all of those questions that were raised in book 1 about her powers. And she's trying to figure out, how does she live in this world where her world has basically been tilted off of its axis because what she thought her life was supposed to be is completely different from what it is. I liked like 90% of this book. Like, I was all for it, I was there, I was ready for it, and then the ending happened. And like, the ending was good, but I felt like it was a tad bit rushed. I could have done with a little bit more time spent on like the fallout. I feel like we had so many different threads that everything was just wrapped up real fast, and it felt, not that it felt convenient, it just felt too fast. Like that said, I love the romance, I love the world, I think she's got this fascinating concept that she's made. I love the questions that are raised in this series about beauty and what is beauty and like how is it defined. I love the way that like it talks about power and wealth and all of that and privilege. It has such great, it's got fantastic side characters. It was really good. If you don't mind endings that are very fast, go for it, okay? Just go for it. Read the series. If you do, maybe just know that happens. I gave it 3 stars. I still do recommend it. I still thought that, especially the first book, was so good and beautiful, and it's a lush world. The next audiobook that I read in March was A Letters to the Church by Frances Chan. I actually DNF'd this one, technically, but I got through most of it. Like, it was not what I thought it was going to be, according to, like, it's hard to get into this. Basically, it was him talking to pastors about how we have to rethink how we do church. I'm not a pastor. I am a layman. And so from the description, it kind of seemed like it was him talking to the church as a whole and not like specifically on how we need to be doing church and how we need to be defining church. I read most of it, or I listened to most of it. I just basically skipped out on the last chapter because that was specifically to pastors. Like, the first good bit of it was stuff that it was, at least, even if I'm not a pastor, like, it was good stuff to think about. But, like, I skipped out on the last chapter. So technically I did not finish this book, but I still gave it 3 stars because I thought it was, what he was saying, I found myself agreeing with. I didn't agree with all of it, but I did find myself agreeing with some of what he was saying, and some of it was eye-opening and did give me things to think about, which is what I was looking for. The next audiobook that I finished was Two Dark Reigns by Kendara Blake. I have feelings about this book. I have a lot of feelings about this book. If you've seen my vlog, I spent like 70% of this book frustrated. Just so frustrated. But let's back up, talk about what the series is about. The series is about these 3 triplet sisters. They each have a different type of magic. You have the poisoners, the naturalists, and the elementals. And so these sisters are all queens. When they turn 16, it's basically a battle to the death, and whichever sister comes out victorious is going to be the queen of Finburn. And there are so many like questions that are raised by that scenario. Who decided that these girls needed to fight each other to the death instead of having them work together? I have feelings about that. I feel like someone didn't like the idea of 3 powerful girls working together to rule a country. I love the first book. I love the second book all the way up to the end because something happens at the end that screwed with one of my ships and it made me mad. This book though, the only storyline I actually was invested in and enjoyed for the most part was Arsinoe. Katerine's storyline got me once we got past the halfway point because at the beginning of her storyline, everyone was being so freaking petty around her, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like she was actually doing a good, decent job as queen, and they were just morons. I felt like Jules' storyline, It's hard because it's so much of how I feel about this book is going to be dependent on the final book and whether or not the plot lines that are introduced or explored in this book, whether those make a difference for the fourth book. Because I feel like Arsinoe's plotline was important, and Katarine's plotline was important, and then there was Jules' plotline, and I was just like, things are already so freaking complicated. Do we need to add a third complication into this disaster that is going on? I liked it, I enjoyed it at the end, and I loved the shit. My main ship is just so good. Oh, supportive boys are so great. I really appreciated the male love interest in this series because he stand his queen. He did. He did, and it was great. Anyways, yeah, I gave it 3 stars because I just so frustrated, and I'm not like, we'll see how I feel. I'm not entirely sure this needed to not be a trilogy. That's my main thing, is like everything that happened in this book, I was like, did this need to happen? And so it's going to depend on the fourth book to see whether or not it actually needed to happen. And I'm sorry about that, but yeah. After that, I read In the Afterlight by Alexandra Bracken. This is the 3rd Darkest Minds book. The Darkest Minds series is about Ruby. That's her name. She is in this world where all the children have gotten this disease, basically, and you either died or you survived. And the ones that survived, like a lot of them died, but the ones that survived have developed powers. All the kids in this world are either in hiding or they have been put in these concentration camps. Ruby escapes at the very beginning of the first book, and the rest of the series is about her trying to kind of find a place in the world where she is safe and doesn't have to worry about being hunted down, because they have what are called skip tracers that like hunt down kids that are not in these camps for the safety of the population. Oh, I have given every book in this series 5 stars because they are all so good. This one was hard to read because Ruby did things at the end of book 1 that definitely had repercussions in book 2 and book 3, and then something happened at the end of book 2 that has repercussions, like it just is tearing at your heart in book 3, and so it was a very hard book to read in places. And also I didn't like Ruby just, she was having to deal with the consequences of some of her actions and the fact that certain people did not trust her. And while I understand, and I definitely think that it was valid that certain people did not trust her, it did not make me, as a shipper, very happy. But again, that it still was necessary, so everything's fine. It's all good. But I loved this series so much. I enjoyed it. I think, like, if you have not read the Darkest Minds series, you need to. I also clearly need to read Darkest Legacy because that is about one of the characters in the series. Oh, there's a moment with the character who's the main character of Darkest Legacy, and like, if you were not crying, I wasn't crying actually, but like, oh, there were tears in my eyes. I was just like, oh, I've been waiting 3 books for this. It was just one of those great character moments where you have been building to it for 3 whole books, and it finally happens, and you're just so happy and relieved and like, yes. Anyways, I love this series. Yep. Yeah, I'm totally... Why be normal when you can just spend your Sunday afternoon talking about books that made you feel things? The final audiobook that I read in March was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. Now, I'm going to say it right now, if you are a plot-driven reader, you're going to have issues with this book. This is a character-driven book. This is a book where we spend a good majority just following the main character, getting to the point where the story is ready to start. Okay? Not a lot happens in this book plot-wise until about the 3/4 mark. I won't lie. But because you are following the main character and you're following her as she learns and she grows and she's having to deal with the problems in her life, I personally wasn't bored. I love books that talk about, like, that end up with character introspection. As long as the characters are interesting and I'm being told an interesting story, I don't necessarily need the plot to be going anywhere, because this plot goes nowhere for the first 3/4. I'm just going to tell you that. But it's done so well that I didn't care. This is a Russian-based fantasy, and it is about Vasya, and she is able to see kind of the little, like, household creatures and woodland creatures and all of that. And unfortunately for her stepmother can also see them, but they have very different reactions because Vasya was raised to think that they were just normal. Like, the domovoi is someone that she's used to just sitting there and talking with on the stove, but her stepmother, who is a very religious woman, thinks that they are all demons. It's really complicated and hard to describe, but basically just like a girl who knows about magic and is having to deal with people who don't like magic. That's what this story is about. It's so full of Russian mythology, and I really enjoyed, like I haven't read much where it's straight up Russian mythology. I know a lot of Norse, I know a lot of Greek, I've read some with Egyptian, but I haven't sat down and read Russian-inspired fantasy, so it was really fun to read. I really liked the dynamic between Vasya and her siblings. It was so sweet and so cute, especially with her closest brother. I don't remember, Alyosha. His name's Alyosha. There definitely are a whole bunch of like really annoying gender dynamic things because of the historical time period that it's set in, but also you have Vasya, who is kind of like spitting in the face of all of these gender norms from her family. Probably my favorite thing about this series was how Katherine Arden took these mythological creatures. She took like the household creatures that the domovoi and the I don't remember the other stories, but like she took them and she put them in a world that they were still able to exist in a world where Christianity was real. Like, it's not that they are demons, even though that's what her stepmother thinks they are. It's just that they are simply creatures in this world that most people can't see. And I really appreciated that. I really liked that twist on it. So it made me happy. I like this series. I'm really interested in the next book to see where it goes. There's not really any romance in this one, but I've been told that there is romance later. And it's one of those, like, what I know of the romance did give me pause before I read this, because the age dynamics could have been really weird. And I feel like because of the way the author has told the story and the fact that Vasya has no, like, very little contact with what will be her love interest eventually, like, growing up she has very little contact with it, it isn't as weird as it could have been, I guess is what I'm saying. I gave The Bear and the Nightingale 4 stars. Now let's move on to the hard copy books that I read. The first one that I finished in March was The Last Olympian. This is the final book in our read-along for the Percy Jackson series. Now you will know that we are doing a Heroes of Olympus read-along for Demigods Anonymous, so like if you haven't checked that out, I will link it up there because it's hopefully it will have gone up by now. Yeah, it should have gone up by now on Kenzie's channel. This is my favorite book in the series. Usually my favorite book is the last book, so no one is surprised by that. But the Percy Jackson series is about Percy Jackson, obviously, and he discovers at the age of 12 that his father is a Greek god, and it kind of ruins his life. It also introduces him to the love of his life, although he doesn't know it at the time. I love those kinds of relationships. I feel like maybe it balances out. Like, I don't think he would give up being a Greek demigod if that meant that he could not have the girlfriend he has. I'm just saying. It's just so good. Like, he does such a good job of bringing things in to finalize the last book. Like, there's so many throwbacks to stuff that's happened in the last 4 books. There's so much build from things that has happened in the last 4 books. I love it so much. If you want to know more about what I love about this book, there's a live show. You can listen to me talk about it for an hour with 2 other people, obviously. It's not just me talking about it. It's me and Min Kobayashi and Kenzie Lee T talking about it. You should check it out because I love this book, and it's just basically me gushing about Percy and his girlfriend for an hour. Also me talking about How to Train Your Dragon 3. We might have mentioned a few things about that. No spoilers, but just like my general impressions. I love this series. It's amazing. You should read it. My bed is covered in books right now. The next hard copy book that I read in March was The Bird King, which I gave 3 stars. I have a review that has a lot of my thoughts. It's about Fatima and Hassan, and they are living in Granada, Spain, around the time that basically the Moors are kicked out of Spain. I thought that the world building was great. I loved the characters. Unfortunately, it did not have a romance that I was like, yes, romance. Like, there just wasn't a romance. It just was. If you're looking for a book that doesn't have romance and it focuses more on platonic relationships, this is a great book for you. I personally was like, there's no romance though. I did actually do a full review, so if you are interested in that, it is up there, maybe, or up there. I'm not entirely sure. Who knows? It was good. I'm glad I read it. I don't know that I would reread it, but I do think that if you enjoy historical fantasy, that if you enjoy platonic relationships and that kind of thing, you should read it, and it will be right up your alley. The next book that I read was also an ebook. It was an e-arc that I received, and that was To Best the Boys by Mary Weber. I also did a full review of this. I gave it 4 stars because, hi guys, like, okay, so this is about Ren, and she lives in a world where the boys are the ones that kind of do the profession, and they're the ones that are involved in sciences and all of that, and the women are the ones that, like, they just basically take care of the house. That's their purpose. That is a problem for Ren because she is very smart and very, like, she's brilliant, and she and her father have been working in their lab trying to figure out what is causing this plague that is affecting their little port town. On top of that, every year there is a scholarship competition where all of the boys in the town go so that they can get a full ride scholarship to this university that is nearby. When Ren's mom starts like showing advanced signs of this disease, Ren decides, I need more advanced equipment than we have in our little basement lab. I am going to disguise myself as a boy and I'm going to enter in the scholarship competition. I love this book so much. So much. The beginning, I will say, the beginning is a little bit weird and muddled. Like, it took me a minute to kind of ground myself in the world and feel like I knew where we were and who we were dealing with. But once that setup has happened, once you've kind of been able to orient yourself in the world, it's like just smooth sailing from there. It was fantastic. I loved it. It had a great romance. It had a great like commentary and exploration of gender dynamics and like the discussion between like gender roles. I love the fact that it was in this really weird world where there's like science, but there's also magic, and there's a twist with the person that's in charge of the scholarship competition that I can't talk about, but if you know what that twist is, I liked that twist. I have a lot of thoughts about this book. And if you want more of them, I'll put the link to my review in the description box. I ended up giving To Best the Boys 4 stars. I enjoyed it so much, and I really do want to reread it because I got an ARC. So I know that there are still edits that were being made at the time that the ARCs were sent out, so it's not in its final form as an ARC, obviously. So I'd like to see if some of the things that I picked up on were fixed. The next book that I finished was The Gilded Wolves by Roshni Chokshi. This is a very hard book to describe the plot without making it sound like 6 other books. This is about Severin and a whole bunch of other people, but like basically it's set in 1889 Paris. Severin runs a hotel. He is a young man running a hotel in Paris, and he is from, in this particular world, there is this magic called forging, and the forging is kind of overseen by, or was overseen by, 4 different kind of royal families, I guess, in his particular part of the world. His legitimacy as the heir to his family kind of legacy was questioned, and so he basically has had to make his own way in the world, and he's been kind of plotting his revenge against the people who put him in this position in the first place. And then his chance to get revenge on these people comes up, and he grabs a whole bunch of his friends, because he's kind of got like this, like he's got his main business, which is the hotel, and he's kind of got like a seedy underworld business where they steal artifacts. It's like he's kind of like Indiana Jones, but with more people involved. I gave this 3 stars. I really, really liked it. I actually would reread it, so I don't know, maybe I gave it 4 stars. I'm not entirely sure, because there definitely were some drawbacks. I do feel like for most people, like the world building could have used a little bit more fleshing out, and the magic system could have used a little bit more fleshing out, but other than that, I liked it. I thought the plot was good. I loved the characters. I know there are a lot of people that sit there and they say that this is 6 of Crows but not as good. It's not 6 of Crows. Like, the closest you come to 6 of Crows is Severin, whose main motive is revenge. And in 6 of Crows you also have Kazabrekker, whose main motive is revenge. And then, like, all of the other characters are completely different. I don't understand the people who are comparing Layla and Inej from 6 of Crows because, like, they are 2 completely different characters. Like, if anything, Layla is more like Nina, and she has her own interesting storyline, and like, I liked it. I thought it was good. It wasn't the best book ever? No, but like, is there a best book ever? I mean, Percy Jackson, but that's a whole different story. It was still a good book. It was still one that was interesting. It still kept me engaged. It still had a great ship that I enjoyed. It also had a love triangle that I'm not sure how I feel about at this point. Depends on whether or not what they do with it. If you are intrigued by historical fantasy, I think you should check this out. I think you should give it a few chapters at least and see if you like it, because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. The final 2 books are both part of a series, and they are both 5-star reads because it's also a reread. All of that information to tell you that I read Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. This is the Infernal Devices series. Might possibly be my favorite Shadowhunters series. I haven't reread all of them yet, so it's between this one and The Mortal Instruments. Definitely not The Dark Artifices, because Queen of Air and Darkness disappointed me. It was good, it just disappointed me. I really need to explain the Shadowhunters books again. I'm gonna do it again because you may never have heard of this series if this is the first time you've seen a video on my channel. Clockwork Angel is the first book, and it opens with Tessa, who is coming from America to London because her brother is working in London, and he has said, come on over to London, I will support you, I've got it, like an apartment, etc., etc., blah, blah, blah. She comes over, only when she arrives in London, her brother is nowhere to be seen, and she ends up being kidnapped by 2 female warlocks. And they're like, oh, well, you have this magic shape-shifting ability, so we're going to torture you until you learn to use the shape-shifting ability. And so they torture her for quite a bit of time. So she learns to use this shape-shifting ability. And then she gets rescued by Shadowhunters. And Shadowhunters are enhanced humans whose job it is to fight the demons that keep trying to come from the other realms into our world. I love this series. I love Will Herondale. I love Jim Carstairs. I love Tessa Gray. This is one of the few where I actually absolutely adore the love triangle, because it's not there just for the drama. Like, it serves a purpose. Both boys serve a purpose in this storyline, and they have unique plots, and they're interesting, and you want to root for both of them, but you don't know which one to root for, and it's just a mess. I love it so much. That's all I can say about it, is I just love it. There is a Shadowhunter's diary that will be coming up about these two books, because I made one. And so, well, you'll get that. Now it is on to the Mortal Instruments. I need to read City of Bones at some point. I haven't gotten it. We're at the end of April? We're at the end of April, and I still haven't read City of Bones. We'll see if we get there. Will is he is just so utterly ridiculous, and I think his ridiculousness has a little bit more, it has a little more reason than some of her other love interests' reasons, specifically Jace. So I understand why people like Will more. I still love Jace, but I understand why people like Will more. And like, if I had to choose, totally a Will Herondale girl. Boy that talks to me in books. That is everything that I read in the month of March. It was a lot of books. Next month, I'm not going to have as many books to talk about, which is fan-freaking-tastic, because this video is going to be a bear to edit. So that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments, what is a book that you read in March? Just talk to me about something you read in March, something that you enjoyed, or something that you really didn't like. Have you read any of these books that I was talking about? Do you have similar feelings? Especially about Two Dark Reigns. Am I the only one feeling like, why does this book exist? Am I the only one feeling that? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, hit that subscribe button. I make videos 2 to 3 times a week about books and writing, and I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. If you want more of me, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Those are both at @thewordnerd with a 3 in nerd instead of the E. That is it for now, my friends. I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!